Welcome to the Black Etc. podcast, a podcast about how ideas and culture spread amongst Black Americans, especially outside mass media. I'm your host, Ian Youssef. Today's guest is Chris Stevens. He's a fantastic writer and cultural critic. He writes about sports, professional, men's and women's, as well as collegiate, NCAA, HBCU. But I know him primarily through his podcast, On the Groove Line. I first came across Chris's work on social media, believe it or not, and I've been a fan of his and following him for well over a decade now. Chris is the ultimate classic R&B fan. He knows just about everything, and he exudes passion for the music. Chris and I had a great discussion about the history of Quiet Storm R&B music as a subgenre, but also as a genre of radio programming. So in last week's episode with Miss Charlotte Draper, we spoke about celebrating the 25th anniversary of National Soul Food Month, which occurs this coming June. This coming June is also another milestone. It's the 50th anniversary of the first Quiet Storm radio broadcast from Melvin Lindsey and DC's WHUR radio station. So Chris and I discussed that first broadcast, the history of Quiet Storm, the characteristics of the music, as well as how that one radio program spread and spawned a whole genre across the country amongst Black radio stations. We talked about some of the things that were going on in Black music in the country as Quiet Storm gained popularity. We also talked about how Quiet Storm has made it into the modern era. We also spoke about the aspirational and class elements of the music, as well as maybe some generational divides. I will say there was one big oversight on my part, and that was we did not talk about Anita Baker, who is in many ways the queen of Quiet Storm, especially in the 80s. That was my fault. But aside from that, I thought we covered a great range of artists and ideas, and I thoroughly enjoyed Chris's contributions here. I thought it was an illuminating discussion. Chris is a really fun and engaging conversation partner. Please enjoy. I'm here with Chris Stevens, music historian, cultural critic, writer, host of On the Groove Line podcast. Today we're talking about the history of Quiet Storm music, not only as a subgenre of R&B, but also as a radio programming format. Welcome, Chris. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Ian. I greatly appreciate it.
There's an important milestone coming up regarding Quiet Storm. Can you tell us what that is?
Absolutely. It is the 50th anniversary of the first ever Quiet Storm show on WHUR out of Washington, D.C., which was hosted by the late, great Melvin Lindsey. And 50 years of the Quiet Storm, it's a beautiful thing. It's a great deal of music that we're going to be talking about in the years to come. So it's a very important milestone.
What was going on in Black music in the country when Quiet Storm first took off?
When you talk about 76, you're definitely talking about disco. I mean, you have Thelma Houston's version of Don't Leave Me This Way, which originally was done by her Melvin and the Blue Notes. You have Diana Ross getting her feet wet with disco with Love Hangover, Marvin Gaye, We Got to Give It Up. You know, so many others in that space of four on the floor, you know, high octane bass, strings and horns and different things of that nature to get people on the dance floor up and moving. So this was a time in the country where Black people started to experience upward mobility in their personal lives and their professional lives. So they were able to cut loose and let their hair down and have a really good time. And disco was an outlet for them to do that. But people started to realize towards the end of the decade that, okay, we can't just be go, go, go 24/7, 365. And that's kind of like where the Quiet Storm comes in.
In terms of the actual music, do you consider Quiet Storm a genre or a subgenre?
You can qualify them as both, honestly. I think if you're talking R&B, it's absolutely a subgenre, but you can separate it by itself because we know R&B has that rhythm aspect of it. You know, the rhythm part of rhythm and blues, which means there is going to be some dance and there's going to be some four counts or whatever. And, you know, the blues part of it, you know, is the downtrodden, bummy part, the depressed part of R&B. So you could probably classify Quiet Storm as a subgenre of R&B with the blues aspect of it when we talk about breakup songs and different things. But you could also call it a separate genre for the love song aspect.
What are some of the hallmarks of the music itself?
Well, for Quiet Storm, you definitely need piano. You need instruments that make people feel emotions, and a good piano, a good string, and a horn that is romantic. Like the horns that you hear on songs like, we'll say, Let Get Down Tonight by Casey and the Sunshine Band, those are not the horns you would hear on the Quiet Storm. Like the horn, like I think the horn you probably mostly associate with Quiet Storm is the saxophone. There are some really good saxophone solos and stuff like Don Myrick's on Earth, Wind, and Fire's Reasons. So, you need a good romantic horn. You need some, strings that, make you feel things, and a good piano. I mean, the drums, the drums obviously are going to slow down because you can't be getting in the groove after hours to 120, 115, 120 BPMs. You need to slow it down a little bit. So you need a slower drum. You're going to have pianos. You're going to have a saxophone and a string, and just putting that all together with some romantic lyricism and vocal performances to, drive it all home.
Mm-hmm. You spoke about the first broadcast with Melvin Lindsey at WHUR in DC. How did Quiet Storm as a Black radio programming format spread from DC to other Black cities? Or we could start with DC first and then move beyond that.
The original Quiet Storm, it's important to differentiate that because WHUR has trademarked that now, because they were the first ones to call it the Quiet Storm, but then a lot of imitators spread up. So it's like, oh no, we got to trademark this. So the Quiet Storm starts, as most good things in Black music and Black radio do, with Cathy Hughes. She was the first woman to be a general manager and vice president of WHUR, and Melvin was her personal assistant. He was a student at Howard. He actually wanted to be a lawyer, but he was Cathy's personal assistant, and one of the DJs that was originally scheduled for that specific time slot flaked on her. So she said, Melvin, you got to do the show tonight. And Melvin didn't want to do the show because he just was not, he didn't feel like he was cut out for radio. So he and Cathy Hughes picked through their best home collection. I mean, there was no production meeting. There was no marketing thing. They just picked records from their home crates. And Melvin took them to the station, played them for an hour, got off the air, but something magical happened. People started calling in, dedicating songs, and all of that. And that's how the Quiet Storm was born. So it's interesting because slow after hours radio was sort of a thing before the Quiet Storm. In fact, from Philadelphia, the late great Tony Brown, who was at WDAS for his entire career, had a show starting in 1972 called the Extrasensory Connection. But he got wind of what Melvin Lindsey was doing in DC at the time and said, okay, so let's change it to the Quiet Storm. So that's why WDAS still has their Quiet Storm, still going strong almost 50 years later. Then you start talking about, Frankie Crocker, adopting that format with WBLS in New York. Lawrence Tanter, who Lakers fans may know as the PA voice of the Lakers, going from the Forum to, it's not the Staples Center anymore. I think it's the Crypto Center or something. But Lawrence Tanter has been the PA voice of the Lakers for over 40 years, but he's also one of the original Quiet Storm DJs out of LA radio. So it spread like wildfire pretty quickly. It's a pretty grassroots movement. I mean, there weren't product planning meetings or anything like that. People just started to realize that after hours, people wanted to slow down a little bit and just relax. And they were like, okay, we can tailor a format to this. And that's how the Quiet Storm sort of, grew legs.
Were there any examples of movies or TV shows that helped to popularize Quiet Storm? I'm thinking outside of like BET, Video Soul, and that type of thing.
Yeah, I think the early days of Quiet Storm, you didn't have that because BET didn't come around until 80, 81. That was Bob Johnson's baby. But, by the time you get to the middle part of the 80s, you're starting to get, Midnight Love on BET. You're starting to get, this groundswell of Black people on TV where the mother and father are slow dancing, to whatever Quiet Storm song of choice they may prefer. But in the early stages of the Quiet Storm, like late 70s to early 80s, this was just something that just was like a grassroots thing. Like people just started noticing what was going on in DC, what was going on in New York, what was going on in Philly, that wherever you had a concentrated Black population, people were like, okay, so we can slow it down after dark and say, all right, let's just start playing some of these ballads from the OJs instead of just running I Love Music into the ground like they were doing back then. Or, listening to, the Isley Brothers had already made their peace with being a power ballad group. So they were already in there. And other groups, like Earth, Wind, and Fire, they could do slow jams, but I think once they started to realize that the Quiet Storm was starting to take off, you start to hear a lot more of what Philip Bailey could bring to the table as a balladeer. Like, for example, on the Spirit album, there's a song on there called Imagination where Philip Bailey just ascends and never comes down. And it is one of the best early Quiet Storm songs outside of the original by the legendary Smokey Robinson. Like, I think you probably have to put that up there as one of the original Quiet Storm classics. So you started to not only get a shift in the radio, but you started to get a shift in the musicians as well. Because a lot of bands at that time were just party, party, party. But then they realized that, hey, we can make some money, with these ballads too. So Quiet Storm really influenced a lot with respect to how black music was changing near the tail end of the 70s and the beginning of the 80s.
You hinted at this earlier, but can you say more about some of the class dimensions of the fandom?
Yeah. When you get to the middle of the 70s, you're getting a lot more black people with college degrees, with corporate jobs, white collar jobs, we would call them. And you're starting to get this sort of relaxation, if you will, this sort of, ability to breathe, because black people could not breathe during the 60s. I mean, we had the civil rights movement. I mean, we lost people like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. I mean, California and the country at large squashed the Black Panthers before they could even really get started. And a lot more black men were dying in Vietnam than their white, Asian, and Latino counterparts. So by the time you get to the 70s, black people are going to college, they're getting degrees, they're getting jobs, they're buying houses, they're buying cars. And I think it's also important to note not only black people, but women. Because people forget women could not get credit cards, bank accounts, and sign for houses and cars in their own names until 1974. So middle of the 70s just was like one of the most progressive eras of all time, probably only second to Barack Obama's presidency. So black people and women at large were starting to make major moves in the 70s. And that's why the Quiet Storm is sort of like this class thing, because you have the privilege to come home after work, turn on your radio, and listen to Let Me Down Easy by the Isley Brothers, or Everlasting Love by Rufus and Shaka Khan, or Love Ballad or We Deserve Each Other's Love by LTD. Like, that's sort of like where that class separation comes into play. Like, there were still some black folks who were still scuffling to make it. They couldn't enjoy the simple pleasures of like a Quiet Storm, but there were some black folks who could.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, the music for some reason feels aspirational, even though the content is not necessarily about money or class or anything like that.
I think that's because everything in this country, unfortunately, since the beginning of this country, has been commodified. Everything that should be a right is looked at as a privilege. And that includes romance, that includes quality time with your loved ones, downtime, whatever. Like, if you're always working to make a buck, you're not going to be in the best frame of mind to be present. All the things that you need to be, romantic. You can't be present. You can't be vulnerable. You can't be open to intimacy and different things of that nature. And that's probably why you get this sort of separation with black families in different areas, because you have, people who grew up with a mom and a dad. You have people who grew up with positive relationship role models. And then you have other folks who didn't. So when you commodify everything like this country does, it's hard to have that sort of ability to unwind and relax and, just be present in the moment, be vulnerable, be intimate. And that's why the Quiet Storm sort of got a bad rap, if you will, with the advent of hip hop as being sort of this, this bougie form of music, when the reality is love is probably the most free thing you can give, to be quite honest. So Quiet Storm really got misunderstood, and a lot of signals got crossed because of that, upward mobility.
How did the fandom break down amongst different age groups over time? Like, were younger and older people listening to it?
I think Quiet Storm has always been like an adult thing, because if you were in a household with mom and dad, they would always send their kids to bed at a certain time. Always. Shucks. Even single parents still sent their kids to bed, certain hours, because even if they were, not romantically involved with somebody, they still like to listen to the music and relax before bed. And that was like the early version of parents having a me time. I mean, parents, can say they have me time now, but back then it was just send the kids to bed, a certain time so they could have that time to themselves so they can unwind before going to bed, get some sleep, get up tomorrow morning, get the kids off to school and go to work and do it all over again. So the Quiet Storm from the beginning always felt like a truly adult thing. And I think that's probably because Black people wanted to shelter their kids from the realities of not just, being Black and poor or whatever, but the fact that heartbreak is a mother. Like, I was joking on a recent episode I did of On the Groove Line that a lot of my peers, because I'm an 81 and 82 baby. I was born in 1981. I was one of the last generation of latchkey kids. And I was joking that the R&B that we listened to from the 90s, a lot of my peers started to have kids really young. And I was joking that I was raised by a strict single mother who was religious and a social worker. So it wasn't going to be no shenanigans on my end. So when you think about it, there's that separation of trying to, be an adult before your time. And that's what parents were trying to safeguard their kids from. So that's why the Quiet Storm always felt like a very mature, grown-up type of thing.
When you look at today's radio, especially Black radio, there's a lot of cookie cutter stuff, corporatized. They're playing the same stuff over and over. But that's not really true of even the modern Quiet Storm radio programs. How has Quiet Storm been able to resist that corporatization?
I think what it is that I said that everything in this country is commodified, but you still can't commodify romance. You still can't commodify love. You still can't commodify intimacy. And that's why I give credit to the Quiet Storm producers and hosts that are still going strong today, because they got to dig. They got to dig for some new stuff, because a lot of the popular R&B artists of today are not making songs for 7 p.m. to midnight. So you have to look at artists who may not be signed to major labels. You have to look at artists who may be doing their own thing and doing all their own promotions and different things, because sometimes, with respect to what the music industry is, it's like a lot of times record companies do the grunt work. They put the songs in front of the program directors and the DJs and say, play this. Not a lot of independent artists have that sort of cachet. So they have to sort of work hard and say, hey, this is my record. Hopefully you'll play it. Hopefully you'll like it. Let your audience listen to it. So it's a challenge. It's absolutely a challenge. And for Quiet Storm to still thrive and evolve in some ways, it's really a credit and a testament to those people who are still doing the shows, because you've got to find artists that are not going to be listened to by the average 18 to 24-year-old, because the average 18 to 24-year-old is not listening to the radio from 7 p.m. to midnight anyway. It's probably going to be somebody 35, 40 and up. So you still got to find people who are making music for people 35, 40 and up. And that's been a challenge, but it's a challenge that a lot of programmers have been able to succeed at.
How has Quiet Storm been flexible enough, you think, to incorporate music through the modern day to fit the category?
I think they've had to, because, as I said, you're not going to get Quiet Storm quality music from the popular artists of today. I mean, you can probably say that when you look at the R&B charts now, you're going to see a lot of Chris Brown on there. You're going to see a lot of, folks who aren't Quiet Storm based artists. So you have to, if you're a program director or a DJ, you're going to have to dig deep. And I don't even think you really have to dig that deep, because Ari Lennox still does a good job of that. Jasmine Sullivan still does a good job of it. Kim, people make fun of Kim, but Kim still makes a lot of good Quiet Storm music. So, there's still people out there, but they're just not people that, again, an 18 to 24-year-old is going to, listen to. Like I said, this is probably going to be for people, 35, 40, 45 and up, who are looking to listen to something more intimate and relaxing once the sun goes down.
Now we get to the part where I ask my guests a series of questions. What songs got people on the dance floor when you were going out dancing at your peak?
Well, I really wasn't a club guy, but this is probably going to tell you a lot about my generation. Like, I can still think of the Lil Jon Eastside Boys Crunk era. And that ain't Quiet Storm in the least. unless you want to count Lovers and Friends. But yeah, I mean, when you think about, I mean, this is back when, you know, you had Crime Mob, Nuck If You Buck, even New York rap, like Diplomats, G Unit. I mean, those type of folks, you know, really had dance floors crowded back in those days. You know, 50 Cent within the club and all of that. That was one of the biggest songs when I was in college. Tell you how long ago that was. So, you know, just anything probably in that R&B, especially Usher. Usher, you know, when Usher and Lil Jon got together with Ludacris, that was, I mean, people have played that song to death, but when it was new, it was irresistible. So I think that's one of the ones that you would definitely, you know, cite from my generation as being one of those club classics.
What is a Black cultural work that's an absolute classic but is underappreciated?
I say Toni Morrison's entire catalog. She's considered one of the GOATs of literature anyway, but I think she is the GOAT. I don't care who you put her up against. I don't care if you put her up against Shakespeare. I don't care if you put her up against F. Scott Fitzgerald. I don't care if you put her up against J.D. Salinger, Catcher in the Rye. I don't care if you put her up against, you know, even people in her own sphere. Like, I mean, granted, you know, you can't have Toni Morrison without Zora Neale Hurston, but I think Toni Morrison took what the best of Black intelligentsia and creatives did and just mastered it to a level that no one has been able to reach. When you think about a book like The Bluest Eye, that absolutely changed my brain chemistry at 21, 22 years old. Like, I make it a note to read The Bluest Eye once a year, just because. Because that book, I mean, the way is just so heartbreaking to think that this little Depression era Black girl who was being, you know, abused by her family and left for dead pretty much, thought that if she was a blue-eyed white girl, her world would be so much better. And that was like a painful reality that a lot of us face as Black people, is that, nah, ain't gonna be no saviors. You know, we can't change our skin. We can't change our complexion. We can't change our eye color. We can only be us. And that's a harsh reality for a 10, 11-year-old girl going through so much to have to deal with. But Toni Morrison made you face it. She put it dead up in your face and said, look, this is what Black people have been dealing with since the beginning of time. So don't expect any sympathy from us, white folks. So I think anything Toni Morrison wrote, like I said, she's considered one of the GOATs, but I think she's the GOAT. And she deserves a lot more love as just a transcendent artist in American history.
What particular dish did your family make that you looked forward to the most?
Whew. I still miss my grandmother's corn fritters, man. I ain't gonna lie to you. My grandmother passed in 2006, and I am still trying to figure out how to make a good corn fritter today because, well, my grandmother was exempt from going to church. My mom made me and my younger sister go all the time, but my grandmother didn't have to go because, well, she was my grandmother. But whenever we would get back from church, I would always look forward to corn fritters, and she would make bacon for me and sausage for my younger sister. And it was just one of those things that just takes me back to when life was simpler. Like, I didn't have bills. I didn't have, you know, things to worry about. I didn't have anything to do but keep my room clean, do my homework, and stay out of my mother's way. That was pretty much it. And, you know, thinking about those corn fritters, you know, adding just a little bit of syrup, you didn't need to add too much. I mean, because the corn was already sweet. It was just like, it was a good time, man. I mean, that's just one of those meals that just brings back so many memories, so many memories.
Do you know if it's a family recipe?
I don't know if it was. It's so funny because my mother and my grandmother both cooked, but I was one of those active kids. Like, me and my friends, we played sports year round. We'd play, you know, pick up basketball or sandlot football and baseball and all of that. So I never really watched them cook. So I couldn't tell you if we ever had any family recipes. And I think that's something that I kind of missed out on. But, you know, it was just one of those things where if grandma said, y'all come get y'all fritters, it was like, yes. So that's the only thing I really remember about it, honestly.
Well, Chris, thanks so much for joining me. Where can people find you?
Thanks, Ian, for having me. Once again, I greatly appreciate this opportunity. You guys can find me on Blue Sky these days at Chris the Writer. That is CHRISTHWRITER. And my music podcast is on a YouTube channel. On the Groove Line, you can go to youtube.com/ you put the @ and then ONTHEGROOVELINE. That's where you can find On the Groove Line.
All right, please check that out. Thanks so much, Chris. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Ian.
I want to thank my guest again, Chris Stevens, for his great knowledge sharing and a great discussion You can find him online at onthegrooveline.com. That's the website for his podcast of the same name. You can find him in social media on Blue Sky. I did want to give Chris an extra special shout out because we actually recorded this before, and because I'm a novice, I kind of messed up the audio and it was unusable. And so I had to hang my head in shame and go back and ask Chris if we could do the interview over. And he was so nice. He agreed to do it, thankfully. So thank you again, Chris, for that. The main lesson I took away from this was in the section where Chris was talking about how modern radio programmers and DJs have resisted corporatization. And they're playing new, deep cuts to find songs that fit the Quiet Storm format in a modern context. What I found fascinating about that is that we're basically talking about, in some ways, gatekeepers. Gatekeeping has become like a dirty word in modern pop culture. I actually don't have the same resistance that most modern people do to the idea of gatekeepers. Gatekeeping obviously is not all positive. It has a lot of drawbacks in terms of limiting the number of people who can influence or contribute to culture. However, if you don't have certain amount of knowledgeable gatekeepers, then corporate interests will run roughshod over everything and standards will diminish greatly. So I actually think some well-placed gatekeeping is not a bad thing all the time and actually can be quite fruitful, especially in terms of music. So the lesson is that you need people with knowledge and or taste to stand up for quality so that moneyed interests don't totally ruin culture and shape it to their narrow interests. Before I go, I want to plug a print interview that will be on the website, blacktcpod.com, of course. This is my second print interview. It was with a great subject, the legendary Thell Torrence, who's a Hall of Fame boxing trainer, literally. He's in the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame, as well as the West Coast Boxing Hall of Fame. He trained under himself, legendary boxing trainer Eddie Futch. Some of Thell's champions you would recognize. Ken Norton and Riddick Bowe are probably the most popular names, but also Montel Griffin, Hasim Rahman, Vasily Girov, Mike McCullum, Wayne McCullough, Tony Tubbs, and a host of others. I spoke with Thell about his upbringing in Camden, Arkansas, his time in the Navy, his move to California, how he became a boxer, how he met Eddie Futch, how he became a boxing trainer, his time owning Hoover Street Gym in Los Angeles, and a bunch of the legendary fighters who would be at Hoover Street Gym, including the great Muhammad Ali. We spoke about some of his more interesting fights, including 2 Riddick Bowe fights of the 90s, the Fan Man fight, where the guy flew in a fan in the middle of the ring. That was Holyfield Bowe 2. And then Bowe's first fight, I think, with Andrew Galata at Madison Square Garden, where after a series of Galata low blows, he was disqualified and there was a brawl that broke out. So Thell was in the corner for both of those weird, legendary fights. So we got his take on that. Thell was a wonderful interview. He has so much knowledge, and I was blessed to be able to speak to him. I also have a personal connection to Thell. He is in fact my uncle. He's my father's sister's husband. They've been married for 60 some odd years. So I've known Thell, of course, all my life. When we would go to visit them in LA, we would be at the Hoover Street Gym seeing a bunch of boxing legends. One that didn't come up in that interview was Scrap Iron. I remember him. So yeah, I just wanted to plug that interview. It will be up soon in the print interview section of the website. Please check it out. As always, please subscribe, like, rate, review on whatever platform you use to listen. Until next time.